Sergeant Colton Drake believed a badge gave him the right to be a god on a lonely stretch of Georgia highway. For years he ruled through fear, confident that no one could touch him. But that changed the moment he pulled over a sleek gray Mustang and mistook two quiet professionals for easy prey. He never checked their IDs. He never saw the lethal calmness in their eyes. He arrested two active-duty Navy SEALs on fabricated charges, certain he had won. He was wrong. One phone call was about to bring a 4-star Admiral and the full wrath of the United States military crashing down on his head. The heat rising off the asphalt on Route 9, just outside the city limits of Oak Haven, Georgia, was enough to distort the air. It was a humid, suffocating stretch of day. Sergeant Colton Drake sat in his patrol cruiser, the air conditioning blasting against his sweat-stained uniform. Drake was heavy-set, with a face that looked as if it had been carved from pure aggressive impatience. He was the kind of cop locals warned visitors about, the king of the petty citation, the tyrant of the traffic stop. He had been running Oak Haven's roads for years, and in his mind, this was not merely a jurisdiction. It was his personal hunting ground. He watched the traffic roll by, eyes narrowing behind mirrored aviators. A rusted pickup, a minivan. Then, something that made him sit up straight. A charcoal gray Ford Mustang GT. It was sleek, pristine, and moving at exactly the speed limit. Too careful, he muttered to himself. As the Mustang passed, he caught a glimpse of the occupants, two black men. The driver was broad-shouldered, wearing a simple-fitted t-shirt and sunglasses. The passenger was leaner, but carried a posture that looked like a coiled spring. Drake put the cruiser in gear and peeled out onto the road. In Oak Haven, two black men in a car were never tourists. In Drake's book, they were suspicious. He tailed them for miles, waiting for a slip-up. He needed a reason, any reason. A tire touching the yellow line, a failure to signal. They gave him nothing. They drove with military precision. Irritated, Drake hit the lights anyway. I'll make something up, he thought. Broken taillight. Erratic lane change. Who was the judge going to believe? The Mustang signaled immediately and pulled onto the gravel shoulder. The stop was perfect. Drake parked behind them, unbuckling his seatbelt. He adjusted his belt, rested his hand on the pommel of his Glock, and swaggered toward the driver's side window. Inside the car, Lieutenant Commander Darius Kane watched the officer approach in the side mirror. Kane was a veteran of combat deployments and currently a platoon commander with SEAL Team 4. Beside him sat Chief Petty Officer Silas Crow, his leading petty officer and best friend since Bud/S training. "Here we go," Silas said, his voice low and bored. "He's got the strut, Darius." "Keep your hands on the dash, Silas. Don't give him an excuse," Kane replied. His voice was calm, the same voice he used when calling in airstrikes in the Hindu Kush. Drake tapped the glass hard with his baton. Kane rolled the window down. "License and registration," Drake barked, not bothering with a greeting. "Good afternoon, officer," Kane said, keeping his hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. "Is there a problem?" "I said license and registration, boy. Don't make me ask twice." Silas's jaw tightened at the word boy, but he remained frozen. Kane slowly moved his hand. "My wallet is in the center console. I am reaching for it now. My registration is in the glove box." "Just get it," Drake snapped, leaning in, his eyes scanning the interior. He saw no drugs, no weapons, just 2 gym bags in the back. "Whose car is this?" "It's a rental, officer," Kane said, handing over his license and the rental agreement. Drake snatched the ID. He looked at it. Darius Kane, Virginia Beach, Virginia. "Virginia," Drake sneered. "You two are a long way from home. What are you doing in Oak Haven? Running drugs? Moving cash?" "We are passing through on our way to a funeral in Florida, officer," Kane replied. "We haven't broken any laws. You crossed the center line back there. Drake lied smoothly. "And you look impaired. Step out of the car." Kane sighed. "Officer, I am a sober driver. I haven't crossed any lines." "I said step out of the car!" Drake yelled, his hand dropping to his holster. "Now, both of you." Kane looked at Silas. A silent communication passed between them, a look that said they could disarm this man in seconds and break 3 of his ribs, but they had to play the game. Slowly they opened the doors and stepped out. Standing up, the dynamic changed immediately. Kane was tall and built like a linebacker. Silas was wired with lean muscle. Drake, standing shorter and soft around the middle, suddenly felt very small. That fear turned instantly into aggression. "Turn around, hands on the hood. Spread them!" Drake screamed, pulling his taser. "Officer, this is unnecessary," Silas said. "Shut up!" Drake fired the taser probes without warning. They hit Silas in the lower back. The clicking sound of the voltage discharge filled the air. Silas grunted, his knees buckling as he hit the gravel, but he did not scream. He simply bit his lip until it bled, riding the lightning. "Silas!" Kane moved, but stopped when Drake pointed his service pistol at Kane's chest. "Do it!" Drake screamed, his hand shaking. "Give me a reason. Get on the ground." Kane raised his hand slowly. He looked at Drake with eyes that were cold and terrifyingly devoid of fear. "You just made a mistake, Sergeant. A career-ending mistake. On the ground." Kane lowered himself to the gravel next to Silas, who was breathing heavily, recovering from the shock. Drake rushed forward, jamming a knee into Kane's spine and wrenching his arms back to cuff him. He did the same to Silas. "You're under arrest," Drake panted, adrenaline flooding his system. "Assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, suspicion of trafficking." "We didn't touch you," Kane said, his face pressed into the dirt. "I say you did," Drake spat. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I got 2 in custody, requesting a tow for their vehicle." "Yeah, looks like high-level runners." As Drake shoved them into the back of the humid cruiser, Kane looked the sergeant dead in the eye. "Check the IDs again, Sergeant," Kane said softly. "Check the military IDs in the wallets." "I don't care who you think you are." Drake slammed the door. "You're in my town now." The Oakhaven precinct was a block of gray concrete that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Drake paraded his trophies through the booking area. "Look what I found rolling down Route 9, Drake boasted to the desk officer, a younger man named Ellis Quinn. 2 big-time players from Virginia. Fancy car, fancy clothes, bad attitudes. Ellis looked up, eyeing Kane and Silas. He saw the way they walked, heads high, despite the handcuffs. He saw the complete lack of panic. Ellis felt a knot of unease in his stomach. "What's the charge, Colton?" "Assault on a police officer," Drake lied effortlessly. "The little one lunged at me. Had to deploy the taser." Silas, still aching from the voltage, just shook his head. "Check the dash cam, Ellis," he said, "if he hasn't deleted it yet." "Shut your mouth!" Drake shoved Silas toward the holding bench. "Empty your pockets. Everything on the counter." Kane remained calm. "Officer Quinn, is it?" He addressed the desk. "Sergeant, I am Lieutenant Commander Darius Kane, United States Navy. This is Chief Petty Officer Silas Crow. We require our 1 phone call immediately." Ellis paused, holding Kane's wallet. He flipped it open and saw the CAC, the Common Access card. He saw the rank. 04. Lieutenant Commander. "Colton," Ellis whispered, his face paling. "These guys are military officers." "So what?" Drake scoffed, logging a bag of breath mints he had found in Kane's pocket as an unknown substance for the lab. "Stolen IDs, or maybe they're just weekend warriors. Doesn't give them the right to attack me." "Colton, this guy is a lieutenant commander. That's like a major in the army. You sure about this?" "Book them, Ellis." Drake slammed his hand on the desk. "I don't care if he's the Prince of Wales. He tried to grab my gun." It was a bold-faced lie, and everyone in the room knew it. But in Oakhaven, Drake was the senior sergeant. He was buddies with Chief Merrick Sloan. He played poker with Judge Quentin Hale. The blue wall was thick here. Ellis looked down, avoiding Kane's eyes, and began typing. Fingerprints, mugs, then the cage. The processing took time. Drake made it as degrading as possible. He made them strip to their boxers, searching for contraband. He mocked their physical fitness. He made Silas stand in the corner while he ate a donut. Through it all, the SEALs did not break. They went into what they called lockdown mode. They observed the exits. They counted the number of officers, 4 visible. They noted the structural weakness of the holding cell bars. They memorized Drake's nameplate number. Finally, they were thrown into a holding cell. It was a cage with a single metal bench. Enjoy the hospitality. Drake grinned through the bars. Judge Hale might see you. Until then, get comfortable. My phone call, Kane said. Federal law, Sergeant. Drake laughed. Sure, there's a payphone in the hall. You can use it when I feel like letting you out. Now, Kane said. The command in his voice was so sharp, so authoritative, that Drake actually flinched. It was not a request. It was an order. Fine, Drake spat. Make your call. Cry to your mommy. It won't help. He buzzed the door open and tossed Kane a cordless phone from the desk. Kane dialed a number from memory. It was not a lawyer. It was not a family member. It was a direct line to a secured office in the Pentagon. Drake leaned against the wall, smirking, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. He expected to hear Kane begging a bail bondsman. Instead, he heard Kane speak in a clipped, formal tone. Code Black, Authentication Whiskey. Tango Foxtrot Niner. This is Asset Kane. Status compromised. Location, Oak Haven Police Department, Georgia. Unlawful detention. Hostile local law enforcement. Drake frowned. Code Black, Asset. Kane paused, listening. Then he said, Yes, sir. He tased Chief Crow. Charges are fabricated. They are denying JAG representation. Yes, sir. I'll hold. Kane lowered the phone and looked at Drake. He wants to speak to the ranking officer on deck. Drake laughed. Who is it? Your sergeant back at boot camp? It's Admiral Gideon Vaughn, Kane said, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. Drake froze. He knew that name. Everyone who watched the news knew that name. Admiral Vaughn, known as the Iron Bull, was a legendary figure who had been advising the president on national security. Bullcrap, Drake said, though his voice wavered. You're bluffing. Take the phone. Kane extended it. Drake snatched the phone. This is Sergeant Drake. Oak Haven PD. Who is this? The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and sounded like tectonic plates grinding together. Sergeant, this is Admiral Gideon Vaughn, United States Navy. You are currently holding 2 of my finest officers. I have just been informed you assaulted one of them. Drake's throat went dry. Look, buddy, impersonating an officer is a... Listen to me very closely, Sergeant. The voice cut him off, dropping an octave. I'm currently at a summit in D.C., but I am boarding a chopper. I'm flying to your location. If my men are not released, fed, and apologized to by the time I land, I will bring the wrath of God down on your little precinct. Do you understand me? They assaulted me, Drake stammered, falling back on his lie. We'll see about that, Vaughn said. I'm bringing a JAG team and a federal liaison. Don't go anywhere, Sergeant. I want to look you in the eye when I take your badge. The line went dead. Drake stared at the phone. His hands were shaking. He looked up at Kane, who was leaning against the cell bars, arms crossed, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. He sounds upset, Silas commented from the bench. Drake slammed the phone down on the desk. It's a prank, he yelled, trying to convince himself. It's a buddy of yours. Nice try. But deep down in the pit of his stomach, Sergeant Drake knew the truth. He had just kicked a tiger, and the jungle was waking up. "Ellis!" he yelled. "Call the chief. Tell him to get down here now." "Why?" Ellis asked. "Just do it, and get the judge." Drake paced the floor. "We need to fast-track this. If we get them convicted, or plead them out before anyone shows up, we're covered." He turned to the SEALs. "You think you can scare me? I'm the law here. By the time your Admiral gets here, you'll be processed property of the state." Kane simply checked his watch. "I'd suggest you use the time to update your resume." The sky over Oakhaven had turned a bruised purple. Inside the precinct, the fluorescent lights buzzed with the intensity of an interrogation lamp. Chief of Police Merrick Sloan arrived after Drake's panic call. Sloan was a man who looked as if he were made of beef jerky and cigar smoke. He wore a cowboy hat even indoors, and walked with a limp he claimed was from a shootout, though everyone knew it was gout. He found Drake pacing the hallway, sweating through his uniform shirt. "Spit it out, Colton," Sloan growled, chewing on an unlit cigar. "You said you caught a whale, but now you're telling me the whale's calling in the Navy." "It's bad, Chief." Drake wiped his forehead. "They're SEALs, active duty, and the one guy, he called Admiral Vaughn, the guy from the news." Sloan stopped chewing. His eyes narrowed. He was not a smart man, but he possessed a low, cunning survival instinct. "Vaughn? The one who sits on the Joint Chiefs? That's the one. He said he's coming." Sloan swore softly. "If he comes down here and finds out you tased a petty officer for a traffic infraction, the feds will turn this department inside out. They'll find the seized cash fund, Colton. They'll find the lost evidence locker." "I know," Drake hissed. "That's why we gotta fix it. If we get a conviction or a plea before he lands, it's a closed case. Double jeopardy or something. We can say we followed procedure. They pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, and we release them. Then it's just their word against ours." Sloan nodded slowly. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only play they had. "I'll call Judge Hale. We'll do an emergency arraignment, night court. We'll tell Hale these guys are flight risks and violent. We get them to plead to disorderly in exchange for dropping the assault charges. They pay a fine, they walk, and we bury the paperwork. What if they don't plead? Then Hale sets bail at $1 million. Sloan smirked cruelly. Then they sit in county until the trial. By the time the Admiral gets here, his boys are already processed and in the system. Even a 4-star general can't unbang a gavel. The machinery of Oakhaven justice began to turn. It was a rusty, corrupt machine, but it was effective. Kane and Silas were hauled out of the cell. They were handcuffed at the wrists and ankles, treated like mass murderers. They were marched down a narrow corridor that connected the police station to the small municipal courthouse next door. The courtroom was dimly lit, smelling of old wood and floor wax. Judge Quentin Hale sat on the bench, wearing his robe over a golf shirt. He was a red-faced man who owed his elections to Chief Sloan's fundraising. "Let's get this over with," Hale grumbled, banging his gavel once. "Case number, State of Georgia versus Darius Kane and Silas Crow." There was no audience, just Drake, Sloan, the court stenographer who looked half asleep, and a disheveled man in a cheap suit. "This is your counsel." Sloan pointed to the disheveled man. "Mr. Harlan Ellis. He's the public defender." Ellis did not even look at the SEALs. He looked at his watch. He walked over to them, smelling of bourbon. "Look, boys," Ellis whispered. "I know Judge Hale. He's in a bad mood. Hale says you guys got rough. If you fight this, you're doing mandatory time. I worked out a deal. You plead no contest to disorderly conduct. You pay bucks each. You go home tonight." Kane looked down at the small lawyer. "We are innocent," he said calmly. "We will not plead to anything." "Don't be an idiot," Ellis hissed. "It's a traffic stop gone wrong. Just pay the ticket and leave." "It wasn't a traffic stop," Silas said, his voice tight from the pain in his back. "It was an ambush." "Mr. Ellis," Judge Hale boomed, "how do your clients plead?" Ellis sighed and turned to the bench. "Your Honor, I need a moment. They're being difficult." "We don't have moments," Hale snapped. "Officer Drake, please take the stand and establish probable cause." Drake walked to the stand. He placed his hand on the Bible. He did not even blink. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do." "Tell us what happened." Drake took a deep breath, weaving his tapestry of lies. "I observed the defendants driving erratically on Route 9, crossing the median, endangering civilians. When I initiated the stop, the passenger, Mr. Crow, exited the vehicle aggressively. He reached for his waistband. I feared for my life. I deployed non-lethal force to subdue the suspect. The driver, Mr. Kane, then attempted to wrestle my service weapon away." Kane listened to the testimony, his face like stone. He was memorizing every word. Every lie was a nail in Drake's coffin, provided they could survive the next hour. "Thank you, officer," Hale said, not bothering to ask for cross-examination. He looked at the seals. "You gentlemen are facing serious time. Assaulting an officer is a felony. However, because you are military, I am willing to be lenient. Plead guilty to the lesser charge now, and this ends." "No," Kane said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. Hale's face turned purple. "Excuse me?" I said no. Kane repeated. "We are not guilty, and we demand a trial." "You want a trial?" Hale laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Fine, you'll get a trial. Until then..." "Considering you have no ties to this community and have demonstrated violence toward law enforcement, I am setting bail." Drake smirked from the witness stand. This was the checkmate. "Bail is set at cash per defendant." Hale slammed the gavel. "Remand them to the county jail immediately." "You can't do that," Silas shouted. "That's unconstitutional." "In my court, I decide what's constitutional," Hale roared. "Get them out of here." Drake and Ellis moved to grab the seals. Drake leaned close to Kane's ear. "Where's your Admiral now, tough guy? Looks like he missed his flight." Kane did not struggle. He simply looked at the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. "He's not late," Kane said softly. "He's waiting for you to commit perjury." The echo of Hale's gavel was still ringing in the air when the sound began. It started as a low thrumming, vibrating the windows of the old courtroom. Thwup. It grew louder, a rhythmic beating that shook dust from the ceiling rafters. "What is that?" Ellis asked, looking around nervously. "Helicopter," Silas said, a small smile finally breaking across his face. "Low altitude, probably a Black Hawk." Chief Sloan stood up, his face pale. "No, they wouldn't land a chopper in the town square." The double doors at the back of the courtroom did not just open. They were thrown wide, with enough force to bang against the walls. Two men in crisp, dark suits entered first, Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents. They moved with fluid precision, scanning the room, their hands near their holsters. They took positions on either side of the aisle. Then he entered. Admiral Gideon Vaughn was a man who occupied space with the density of a collapsed star. He was wearing his service khakis, the ribbons on his chest stacked so high they looked like armor. He had a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that could peel paint off a bulkhead. He did not walk. He marched. Following him were two JAG officers, military lawyers carrying briefcases, and a captain in full-dress uniform. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the buzzing lights seemed to quiet down. Drake felt his knees turn to water. He gripped the railing of the witness stand to keep from falling. Judge Hale, realizing his authority was being challenged, tried to bluster. "Who do you think you are? You can't just barge into my courtroom. This is a closed session." Admiral Vaughn stopped in the center of the room. He looked at the handcuffed seals, noting the dirt on their clothes and the pain in Silas's posture. Then he slowly turned his head to face the bench. "I am Admiral Gideon Vaughn, United States Navy." His voice was calm, but it carried a resonance that made the wood vibrate. "And you, sir, are holding my assets." "I don't care if you're the president," Hale shouted. though his voice cracked. "This is a state matter. You have no jurisdiction here." Vaughn signaled to one of the JAG officers. The lawyer stepped forward and slapped a document onto the judge's bench. "That," Vaughn said, "is a federal writ of habeas corpus signed by a federal district judge in Atlanta. It transfers custody of these men to the Department of the Navy immediately, pending a federal investigation into civil rights violations." Hale looked at the paper. His hands shook. "Civil rights violations and kidnapping," Vaughn added, "and conspiracy." "Now wait just a minute." Chief Sloan stepped out from the shadows, trying to use his physical size to intimidate. "Nobody kidnapped anyone. These boys broke the law. We have testimony." Vaughn turned to Drake, who was still frozen on the stand. The Admiral walked right up to the witness box. He leaned in, his face inches from Drake's. "Testimony," Vaughn repeated. "Is that right, Sergeant?" Drake could not speak. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Did you know," Vaughn said conversationally, "that the vehicle you pulled over, a rental procured by the Department of Defense, is equipped with a prototype black box telemetry system? It records audio, video, speed, and GPS location to a cloud server in real time." Drake's heart stopped. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "We watched the video on the flight over," Vaughn continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "We saw them signal. We saw them stop. We saw you taser a complying man in the back. And we certainly heard you call them boys." The Admiral straightened up and addressed the room. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently en route to your precinct to secure your dashcam servers before you can lose them. But it doesn't matter. We already have the evidence." Chief Sloan made a move toward the door. I need to make a call." "Sit down," one of the NCIS agents barked, stepping in front of the chief. Vaughn turned back to Judge Hale. "Release them now, or I will have you arrested for obstruction of federal justice right here on your own bench." Hale looked at Sloan. Sloan looked at the floor. The game was up. "Release them," Hale whispered to the bailiff. Ellis, the young desk officer who had been guarding the door, rushed over to unlock the handcuffs. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped the keys twice. As soon as the cuffs clicked off, Silas rubbed his wrists. Kane stood up, straightened his shirt, and saluted the Admiral. "Reporting as ordered, sir," Kane said. "Apologies for the delay." "At ease, Commander," Vaughn said, his eyes softening slightly. "Are you injured?" "Minor contusions from the taser," Silas said. "Nothing the corpsman can't fix." "Good." Vaughn turned back to Drake. Drake was trembling. The reality of what he had done was crashing down on him. He was not just losing his job. He was looking at federal prison. "Sergeant Drake," Vaughn said, "you wanted to play soldier. You wanted to act like a warrior." I was just doing my job," Drake squeaked. "No." Vaughn shook his head. "You were a bully with a badge, and you just picked a fight with the wrong family." Vaughn turned to the JAG officer. "Is the United States Attorney on the line?" "Yes, Admiral. She's listening." "Good." Vaughn looked at the judge, the chief, and Drake. "I want them all detained. The FBI will take formal custody. Until then, my MPs will ensure nobody leaves this room." "You can't do this!" Drake screamed, finally snapping. "This is my town. I run this town." He reached for his belt, not for his gun, but out of habit. A reflex of authority. Before he could even touch leather, the two NCIS agents had weapons drawn and leveled at his chest. "Don't," Kane said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Don't make it worse, Colton." Drake froze. He looked at the guns. He looked at the Admiral. He looked at the two black men he had tried to crush. Slowly, Sergeant Drake raised his hands. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by the terrified look of a man watching his life burn to the ground. "Karma," Silas whispered as he walked past the witness stand. "It's a hell of a thing." The silence following Admiral Vaughn's ultimatum was broken by the screeching of tires outside. It was not just one car. It sounded like an invasion. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom were pushed open again. But this time, it was not the polished suits of the NCIS. It was the FBI hostage rescue team and a squad of federal agents in windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI. Leading them was Special Agent in Charge Lila Quinn. Quinn was a legend in the Bureau, a woman known for dismantling organized crime syndicates in Chicago before taking over the Atlanta field office. She looked at the scene, a 4-star Admiral standing guard over a terrified local judge and police sergeant, while 2 Navy SEALs rubbed their wrists. "Admiral," Quinn nodded respectfully. "We have the perimeter secured. My tech team is already at the precinct imaging the servers." "They're all yours, Lila," Vaughn said, stepping back. "I want to be clear. My men are victims here. But the rot in this town goes deeper than a traffic stop." "We know," Quinn said, her eyes scanning Drake and Chief Sloan. "We've been building a file on Oakhaven. We just needed a trigger event. Sergeant Drake, you just provided it." Drake, now handcuffed by federal agents, looked at Chief Sloan. "Chief, you said we were covered. You said you paid off the feds." The room went deadly silent. Drake, in his panic, had just admitted to federal bribery in front of 30 witnesses. "Get him out of here," Quinn ordered. "Separate them. I want Drake in interview room A and Sloan in B. Don't let them talk to each other." As they dragged Drake out, he passed Kane. The SEAL did not mock him. He did not smile. He simply looked at Drake with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You sold your soul for a power trip, Sergeant," Kane said quietly. "Now you have to pay the bill." While the lawyers argued in the courthouse, the real drama was unfolding at the police station next door. The FBI raided the building with surgical precision. What they found was shocking, even for veteran agents. Behind a false wall in the evidence locker, they found unauthorized weapons, bags of cash, and illegal narcotics that had been marked as destroyed in the logs. But the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that would turn this from a scandal into a national tragedy, was found in Drake's personal locker. It was a collection of SD cards. Drake, paranoid that his chief would one day turn on him, had kept copies of his own body cam footage, the footage he had supposedly deleted from the server. He kept them as insurance. Agent Marissa Landon, a forensic data specialist, plugged the first card into her laptop. "Sir," she called out to Quinn, "you need to see this." On the screen was Drake pulling over a minivan. A young mother was driving. Drake was seen reaching into his pocket, pulling out a small baggie of white powder, and dropping it onto the passenger seat, while the woman was looking for her registration. "Gotcha," the Drake on the screen whispered. "He planted it," Quinn said, her voice cold. "He's been planting evidence to meet arrest quotas and seize vehicles for auction." "There are cards here, sir," Landon said. "Victims." Quinn looked at the stack of digital memories. "That's not victims. That's lawsuits. Ruined lives. Book him on everything. Racketeering. Deprivation of rights. Perjury. Possession with intent to distribute. Throw the whole library at him." While Drake was spilling his secrets, the media storm was raging. Lieutenant Commander Darius Kane and Chief Silas Crow held a press conference outside the Naval Special Warfare Command in Virginia Beach. They stood tall in full dress whites, their medals gleaming in the sun. "We are not here to ask for sympathy," Kane told the cameras. "We are trained to endure hardship. We are here to speak for the people who couldn't call an admiral, the people who didn't have a voice when Sergeant Drake and Chief Sloan stripped them of their dignity." Silas stepped forward. "This isn't about black or white anymore. It's about blue. It's about the oath. When you wear a badge, you hold a sacred trust. Men like Drake use that badge as a weapon, and today we are taking that weapon back." The public reaction was instantaneous. The Oakhaven 2 became a rallying cry. People who had been arrested in Oakhaven over the decade started coming forward. The class action lawsuit grew to include plaintiffs. The blue wall that Drake relied on did not just crack, it vaporized. The Fraternal Order of Police released a statement condemning Drake. The governor of Georgia suspended the entire Oak Haven Police Department, pending a complete restructuring. Drake watched the press conference from a television in the common area of the Federal Detention Center. Other inmates, some of whom had been put there by dirty cops, glared at him. Drake realized then that prison was not going to be safe for him. He was a cop in a cage, and the lions were hungry. The federal courthouse in Atlanta was a fortress of glass and steel, a far cry from the dusty wood-paneled room where Drake used to play king. The trial of United States versus Colton Drake et al. Had become a national spectacle. The media dubbed it the Blue Trap Trial. Outside the courthouse, protesters stood shoulder to shoulder with military veterans holding signs that read, "Honor the Oath" and "No More Bullies." Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The gallery was packed to capacity. In the front row, Lieutenant Commander Darius Kane and Chief Silas Crow sat in full-service dress blue uniforms. They were the picture of discipline. Medals aligned perfectly, shoes gleaming, faces stoic. They were not there to gloat. They were there to witness. Behind them sat the Oak Haven Coalition, over 100 victims who had been identified from Drake's secret stash of SD cards. There were soccer moms, college students, truck drivers, and retirees. They were a mosaic of ordinary Americans united by the fact that Drake had ruined their lives for a paycheck. Drake sat at the defense table, a shadow of the man he once was. He had lost weight. His cheap suit hung off his frame like a shroud. He refused to look at the gallery. He kept his eyes glued to the table, his hands trembling so violently he had to clasp them together to stop the shaking. The prosecution, led by the ruthless Lila Quinn, did not just present a case. She told a horror story. She did not start with the SEALs. She started with the others. "The government calls Mrs. Marissa Quinn," Quinn announced. A young woman walked to the stand. She looked nervous, clutching a tissue. Drake flinched when he heard her name. "Mrs. Quinn," Quinn said softly. "Can you tell the jury what happened?" "I was driving my kids to soccer practice," Marissa began, her voice shaking. "Officer Drake pulled me over. He said I had a broken taillight. I knew I didn't, but I was polite. He asked to search the car. I said yes, because I had nothing to hide." She paused, wiping her eyes. "He found a bag of methamphetamine under the passenger seat. I had never seen it before. He arrested me in front of my children. My 6-year-old was screaming." The jury looked at Drake with open disgust. "I lost my job at the bank," Marissa continued, sobbing now. "I lost custody of my children until the charges were dropped for lack of evidence, but the arrest record stayed. I couldn't get a job. We lost our house." Quinn walked over to the evidence table and picked up a small SD card. "Mrs. Quinn, we recovered this footage from the defendant's personal locker. Would you like to see what actually happened?" The video played on the massive courtroom screens. It showed Drake leaning into the minivan, while Marissa was distracted by her kids. It showed him clearly palming a small baggie from his tactical vest and sliding it under the seat. On the audio, Drake could be heard chuckling to himself, muttering, "That's a bingo." The courtroom erupted. The judge had to bang the gavel to restore order. Drake shrank into his chair, wishing the floor would open up and swallow him. But the final nail in the coffin was when Commander Darius Kane took the stand. Kane did not look like a victim. He looked like a force of nature. He answered questions with clipped military precision. "Commander," Quinn asked, "defense counsel has argued that Sergeant Drake was under extreme stress and made a split-second judgment call when he tased Chief Crow. As a military officer, you are familiar with high-stress environments, correct?" "I am," Kane replied, his voice deep and resonant. "I have operated in active combat zones in multiple countries. In your expert opinion, Was the situation on Route 9 a high-stress environment? Kane turned his head slowly and locked eyes with Drake. For the first time in the trial, Drake was forced to look back. He saw no anger in Kane's eyes, only a terrifying, icy calm. "No," Kane said. "It was a sunny stretch of day in Georgia. There was no incoming fire. There were no civilians in danger. The only stress in that situation was the stress Sergeant Drake created because he wanted to dominate two men he felt were inferior to him. Did you fear for your life?" "I feared for my life, and I feared for the life of my chief," Kane said. "Not because we were outmatched, but because we were dealing with a man who had no honor. A terrorist in a war zone has an ideology. You can predict him. A corrupt officer with a badge has only ego. That makes him the most dangerous thing on earth." The silence that followed was heavy. The jury was not just convinced, they were radicalized. The jury deliberated. It was a mere formality. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Colton Drake, guilty on all counts, guilty of racketeering, kidnapping, perjury, evidence tampering, deprivation of rights under color of law." Drake closed his eyes. He felt a tear slide down his cheek. It was over. Judge Lila Quinn was a woman who had spent years on the bench. She had seen murderers, cartel bosses, and terrorists. She looked at Drake with a level of disdain usually reserved for insects. "Mr. Drake, please stand," she ordered. Drake wobbled to his feet. His lawyer held his elbow to keep him upright. "In my decades on this bench," Judge Quinn began, her voice cutting through the air, "I have never seen a more grotesque abuse of power. You didn't just break the law. You wore the law like a costume to prey on the weak. You destroyed families for bonus checks. You kidnapped American servicemen for your own amusement." She adjusted her glasses. "You are a bully, Mr. Drake. And like all bullies, you are a coward when the power dynamic shifts." "Your Honor, please," Drake pleaded, his voice cracking. "I have a family." "So did Mrs. Quinn," Judge Quinn snapped. "So did the other people you processed. You didn't care about their families." She looked down at the sentencing guidelines. "For the crimes committed, I am sentencing you to years in a federal penitentiary. There will be no possibility of parole." The gallery gasped. Years. It was a life sentence. "Furthermore," Judge Quinn continued, delivering the final blow, "I am recommending that you serve your time at USP Coleman 2, a maximum security facility. And due to the nature of your crimes, betraying the public trust, I am denying the request for protective custody. You will serve in the general population." Drake's legs gave out. He collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "You can't! They'll kill me! You can't put me in Gen Pop!" "Take him away." Judge Quinn banged the gavel. As the gavel banged, the courtroom erupted. Two bailiffs moved in, pulling Drake's hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the same sound Drake had used on Kane. The karma was precise. Drake looked back at the gallery as he was led out. He locked eyes with Kane. He expected to see a smirk, a look of triumph. But Kane just looked tired. There was no joy in sending a man to prison. There was only the necessary duty of removing a threat. Kane gave him a single, slow nod, a nod that said it was over. Then the door slammed shut, and Colton Drake was gone. Meanwhile, in a high-rise conference room in Atlanta, Admiral Gideon Vaughn sat at the head of a long mahogany table. He was not in uniform. He was in a sharp gray suit. Flanking him were 3 military lawyers and a private civil rights attorney named Marissa Landon. Across the table sat the legal team for Oak Haven County, looking like deer in headlights. "Gentlemen," Vaughn began, his voice calm but filling the room. "My lawyers tell me you are offering a settlement, millions, and a public apology." The county lawyer nodded vigorously. "Yes, Admiral. The county is prepared to pay immediately to avoid further litigation. We are deeply sorry for the actions of Sergeant Drake." Vaughn picked up a glass of water, took a sip, and set it down. "You think this is about money?" Vaughn asked. "I don't need your money. I have a pension, and I have my integrity, neither of which your client seems to possess." "Admiral, it's a very generous offer," the lawyer stammered. "It's hush money," Vaughn said. "You want me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You want this to go away so you can hire a new sheriff and go back to business as usual." Vaughn stood up. He walked to the window, looking out over the city. "Here is my counteroffer," Vaughn said, turning back to them. "I will not sue for a single penny for myself. However, I am filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of every person Sergeant Drake and Chief Sloan have illegally stopped. My team has already identified victims." The county lawyers dropped their pens. "Plaintiffs. It would bankrupt the county. Furthermore," Vaughn continued, "I want a federal consent decree. I want the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department dissolved and policing duties turned over to the state police until a federally appointed oversight board, which I will help select, can rebuild the department from the ground up." "Admiral, you can't demand that," the lawyer protested. That's a takeover." "I am an admiral in the United States Navy," Vaughn said, his eyes hard as flint. "I specialize in nation building and dismantling hostile regimes. You harbored a hostile regime on American soil. Those are my terms." Vaughn walked out of the room, leaving the lawyers in stunned silence. Outside in the hallway, his son Kieran was waiting. He had been briefed on the extent of the situation. "You really aren't taking the money, Dad?" Kieran asked. "You could retire on that." "Kieran." Vaughn put a hand on his son's shoulder. "There are things more expensive than money. Freedom is one. Dignity is another. If I took that money, I'd be selling the dignity of every person that man bullied on the side of the road. I couldn't look you in the eye if I did that." Kieran smiled. "You're a hard man to beat, Dad." "I didn't beat them, son," Vaughn said, checking his watch. "The truth beat them. I just made the phone call." Back in the cell, Colton Drake sat on his bunk. The reality of his future was settling in. He would lose his house. His wife had already stopped answering his calls. He was facing federal prison time. And the worst part, he knew deep down that he deserved it. He had spent years thinking he was the wolf, preying on the sheep. He never stopped to think that one day he might try to bite a lion. The federal courthouse in Atlanta was surrounded by a sea of media vans. The trial of United States versus Colton Drake and United States versus Merrick Sloan had become a national spectacle, a symbol of the reckoning between accountability and abuse of power. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was stale and thick with tension. Admiral Gideon Vaughn sat in the front row, dressed not in his uniform, but in a charcoal gray suit. He looked like a civilian, a father, just a man. Alongside him sat Judge Lila Quinn, who had flown in from D.C. just for this moment. His presence sent a clear message to the judge. The United States Navy is watching. Colton Drake sat at the defense table. He looked deflated. Gone was the swagger, the tactical vest, the sneer. He had lost pounds. His cheap suit hung loosely on his frame. He looked small. The trial had been a disaster for the defense. The prosecution had played the airport security footage, the cell phone video, and the damning audio from the Pentagon call. They had brought in the human resources director from the Oak Haven Police Department to testify about Drake's fraudulent application. They had brought in a spinal specialist to testify about the long-term damage to Crow's lower back. But the final nail in the coffin was Drake's own testimony. Under cross-examination, he had crumbled, admitting that he targeted Kane simply because he looked too clean to be real. It was an admission of bias that gasped through the courtroom. Judge Lila Quinn, a woman known for her zero-tolerance policy on public corruption, shuffled her papers. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at Drake. "Mr. Drake, please please did it." Colton stood up, his legs shaking. "In my years on the bench," Judge Quinn began, her voice echoing in the silent room, I have seen many officers make mistakes in the heat of the moment. Danger is real, and split-second decisions are difficult. But this, she held up the case file. This was not a split-second decision. This was a sustained act of ego, malice, and bullying. She leaned forward. You targeted a man who has given more to this country in a single deployment than you have in your entire life. You mocked his service. You assaulted him while he was compliant. And then, when caught, you lied to the world on national television. Drake looked down at his shoes. But the most egregious offense, the judge continued, is the betrayal of the public trust. You wore a badge you didn't earn. You held power you didn't deserve. You are the very definition of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Your Honor, please, Drake whispered. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix a fractured vertebra, Mr. Drake. And it doesn't restore the faith of the community. The judge picked up her gavel. On the charge of aggravated battery, I sentence you to years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. On the charge of impersonating a peace officer and fraud, I sentence you to an additional years. These sentences are to run consecutively. Drake's knees go. Furthermore, the judge added, you are ordered to pay restitution to Commander Kane in the amount of $250,000. Since you have no assets, your future wages will be garnished by 40% until the debt is paid. You will never work in security or law enforcement again. Bailiff, take him away. As the gavel banged, crack, the courtroom erupted. 2 bailiffs moved in, pulling Drake's hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the same sound Drake had used on Kane. The karma was precise. Drake looked back at the gallery as he was led out. He locked eyes with Kane. He expected to see a smirk, a look of triumph. But Kane just looked tired. There was no joy in sending a man to prison. There was only the necessary duty of removing a threat. Kane gave him a single, slow nod, a nod that said it was over. Then the door slammed shut, and Colton Drake was gone. The sun was setting over the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. The air was crisp, smelling of autumn leaves. Captain Darius Kane stood on the meticulously manicured lawn of the Washington Navy Yard. The promotion ceremony had been small, just as he requested. No cameras, no fanfare. Admiral Gideon Vaughn pinned the new insignia on Kane's collar, the silver eagle of a Navy captain. You earned this, Darius, Vaughn said, shaking his hand. And you earned it again in Oakhaven. Most men would have fought back. You had the discipline to let the system work, even when the system was trying to break you. Thank you, Admiral, Kane said. I just wanted to get home to Julian. Speaking of which, Vaughn smiled, pointing toward the buffet table. Julian, now missing a front tooth, was running in circles with the Admiral's golden retriever. He was laughing, a sound pure and unburdened by the darkness his father had shielded him from. Kane walked over to him. Julian stopped running and looked up at him, squinting in the sunlight. Daddy, are you a pirate now? He asked, pointing to the eagle. Kane laughed, picking him up. No, sweetie, still just a sailor. Are you going away again? Julian asked, his voice turning serious. Not for a long time, Kane promised. He had taken a shore-duty assignment at the Pentagon to oversee training protocols. He was done with the sandbox for a while. He had a different mission now. Raising him. He sat on a bench holding Julian on his lap, looking out at the river. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He did not care about the news anymore. But if he had looked, he would have seen a small article on page 14 of the Chicago Tribune. Former officer Colton Drake denied protective custody. The article detailed how Drake, now inmate number 482910, was having a difficult adjustment period at Stateville Correctional Center. The general population did not take kindly to dirty cops. He was working in the laundry room for 12 cents an hour, scrubbing stains out of uniforms he would never wear again. He had lost his condo. His wife had left him. He was alone in a concrete box with nothing but time to think about those minutes on the side of the road. Kane did not need to know that. He did not need to gloat. The universe had balanced the scales. He looked down at Julian. "You know, baby, there's one thing I learned this year." "What's that, Daddy?" "That being strong doesn't mean you have to fight everyone," Kane said softly. "Sometimes being strong just means standing your ground and telling the truth. The truth always wins eventually." Julian rested his head on his shoulder, tracing the silver eagle on his collar. "I know. You're my hero." Kane closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun and the weight of his son. He was not a hero because of the medals, or the rank, or the wars. He was a hero because he had kept his promise to return to him. And for Captain Darius Kane, that was the only victory that mattered. And that is the story of how minutes of arrogance cost a man his entire life. Colton Drake thought the uniform made the man, but he learned the hard way that it is the character underneath that counts. He mistook Commander Kane's silence for weakness, not realizing it was the terrifying discipline of a warrior who knew exactly how dangerous he really was. It is a powerful reminder to all of us. Treat everyone with respect, whether they are a CEO, a janitor, or a quiet man standing beside a gray Mustang. You never know who you are talking to, and you never know when the karma you dish out is going to come back and knock you down. What would you have done if you were in Commander Kane's shoes? Could you have kept your cool while being humiliated, or would you have fought back? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story about karma hitting back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.